Hi guys, it's Sam for Digital Meat again, and today we're going to be looking at the Subsurface Scattering Shader in Cinema 4D. So what does subsurface scattering actually do? Well, this is a perfect example of subsurface scattering. As you can see, light penetrates the surface of this sort of semi-translucent object, skin, and it's bounced around inside of it and then comes back out. And it'll exit the surface a sort of a regular angle or whatever, but we can actually do this inside Cinema 4D. So let's take a look at that. Okay, what I've done is I've just grabbed this dinosaur object. You can actually find that if you go up to your content browser and have a look in there. It doesn't have to be this. Obviously, you can use whatever you like, but this is the object that I'm using. So let's create a material by double clicking in the material tab. Open this up. Let's just call this Dino. We don't need our colour for now or our reflections channel because the subsurface scattering should live inside the luminance channel, and that's apparent when you look at this picture really, because it does give off this luminant quality in the way that it sort of transmits light. So let's turn our luminance channel on, go up to our texture and click this little arrow here, go down to effects and then go down to the subsurface scattering. Okay, so now that's in there. So if we click on this, we can go inside the subsurface scattering shader and we can go through what it actually does. So let's apply this to our T-Rex. Now, as you can see, the object's gone black, and that's probably because we don't have anything in the colour channel, so no worries there though. One thing to point out, the subsurface scattering shader actually renders faster in the physical renderer. So I'm going to choose physical, it was already on. Take these off for now. So we go to our physical settings. I've just left it on adaptive and set it to automatic. That way it will figure out when it needs to push more samples in and when it doesn't. And I've just set my shading error threshold to 15%. So that should be fine for what we need. Right, now we need a light in there. You will also notice that my T-Rex, it's separated into teeth, body, left eye, right eye, and I've got it inside a connect object. I've got that turned off at the moment, and I'll show you why I've put this connect object in there. So we'll just close this up for now. Right, let's get a light in here then. A nice little area light, that'll do. Let's get this sort of... Actually, let's have a look at our rotation of our dinosaur. Okay, so that's straight on now. Just grab our light. Where are you? And get that facing our object. And scale it up. Okay, that should be fine. How far away? It's quite near our object. Maybe we'll put a plane in as a floor as well. Actually, even better, we can actually put a floor object in. There we go. Now, for those of you that don't know, the floor object looks like it's this size, but it's actually an infinite object. So if I render this, it goes on forever. Now you can already see kind of what the subsurface scattering is doing. Light is transmitted into it, and it kind of bounces around a little bit, and you can see that it's glowing on the edges. So, you know, light's been sort of transmitted through. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more depth then. So for the light, we've got no shadows at the moment, so let's turn area shadows on. And also, if we go to the shadow tab, the density is 100%. So let's just drop that to 90. And the colour is black, and shadows are rarely ever black. So let's give it a slightly blue hue, something like that. That should be okay. And have a look at that, see how we're doing. Okay, a little bit more natural. Probably need some more samples in the area shadow there. But we don't really need to worry about that right now. We're concentrating on the shader itself. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's open up our material. Luminance, subsurface scattering. Now there are presets here, but I'm going to go through from scratch. Now, let's have a look at these settings. We've got multiple diffuse, which means you get multiple bounces within inside the object, which gives you a lot more realistic result. And then you've got the single. This isn't enabled at the moment. I'm going to be looking at the multiple today because I think it gives a lot nicer sort of result. Let's have a look at the advanced. We don't need to worry about that or the lights section. So if we go back to the shader tab, right, we've got the color, which is the color. It's like the base color of our luminance. So if we set this something quite bright, like red, and then give it a little render, we can see that it's now red. Surprise, surprise. Okay, so that's that dealt with. Now here you can see the path length, and that basically describes how far light penetrates before it starts to fade out. At the moment it's set to 10 centimeters, so let's actually render this to yeah, those settings are fine. We'll render to the picture viewer, and then we can compare. These are some tests that I've done earlier. We can actually remove them. Okay, so we've got our image there. So that's a path length of 10 centimeters. So let's just crank that up to 30 and see what we get from that. So as you can see, light is being transmitted through the object a lot further. You see it's a lot darker in the first render, and it's a lot lighter in the second render. Okay, one thing you should note, the lower the path length, the longer the render times. So if I put this down to say something like, I don't know, 4 centimeters, and then render. So having a good old think about that. So you can see that one took 10 seconds, so a lot longer than the render before. So the lower the path length, the higher the render times. Now we can actually optimize this so it renders a little bit quicker. So if we go to our multiple tab, the sample density is at 100%. So let me have a look. Yeah, that's fine. So if I drop this sample density down to something really low, too low, like 5%, we'll hopefully start seeing some artifacting in our... Yeah, you can see here, we've got this spotty effect, but you can see it rendered in, 8 seconds, which is a couple of seconds faster than the last one. But you can see that you can actually see where the sample's locations are. So if we go back to our material, you can see it's set to 10%, but then we've got this attribute here called smoothing, and what that does is it smooths out the samples. It tries to interpolate between them. So if I whack this up to something like 50%, you can see that you can still see the spots, but you can see how it's blurred the radius of those samples, that it's tried to sort of like mix between them. I'm just going to whack a camera in here so I can come back to this view at will. We'll pop round the other side of this, render out and see if those samples are a little bit more visible from, yeah, you can sort of see it's a bit spotty on the legs and that kind of thing. It doesn't look very pretty. Okay. So, to get a sort of like average, I mean, this at 100%, oh, that's 1,000%, but at 100%, we can actually cut that down. So if we say we cut that down to 50 and then put the smoothing up by, I don't know, 25, 30, we should be able to get a pretty good result from that and save a little bit of the render time on it. So yeah, I mean, you can't see the spots anymore. And it rendered out in 9 seconds, which ain't bad really. Okay, so we could maybe even crank that down a little bit more then. So let's go back into this and say our sample density is 40% on our smoothings. Well, I'll leave it at 30 for now. I'll give it just a little render in the viewport. That's not bad. I mean, we can leave it like that for now, and if we need to crank it up later, we will do. Okay, so that's a way of, you know, just speeding things up for you. And also this threshold value here. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the help. I can't stress enough how important the help menu is in Cinema 4D. Just by right-clicking on most things and going to Show Help, you can find out about that attribute, and it's really, really helpful. So our threshold here. Let's have a look. Threshold. Increasing threshold values from left to right with correspondingly decreasing render times. Artifacting increases accordingly. So you can see here there's some artifacting. So what we could do is like push it up, keep pushing it up until we get artifacting, and then lower it down again. So we're on 0.1 at the moment, so let's try 1 and see if that changes anything for us. I mean, that was really, really quick. And there's no artifact in there that I can see, to be honest. Let's just get close into something and see if we can identify any problems. No, that looks... we can see a little bit here, but I don't know if that's actually the threshold or not. So let's render out in the picture viewer so we can have a little compare. Okay, and then go back to the multiple tab. We've got a threshold of 1. It was 0.1 before, so let's put it back to that. I think it was that anyway. If you right click and say reset to default, yeah, it was 0.1. And then we can render to the picture viewer again. Right, well, it was artifacting. You can see we've got an artifact there, and it's gone when we've dropped back down. So maybe if we do a halfway house, and say 0.5, and then render again. Okay, so we've got no artifacting on the foot at 0.5, but we've sped our render time up. It's 5 seconds now, so that's totally acceptable. Okay, so back to our dyno. There's a camera here, there we go. So all in all, yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, okay, right. So now we've optimized a little bit. It means that we can drop our path length down and not suffer from, you know, massively increasing our render times, thanks to some settings we've tweaked in here. Okay, so if we go back to the shader, we can see our path length. Now, we've already talked about that. The further up it goes, the more, the less the light is absorbed. It will actually come through. Now, if we've got a little toggle here, if we drop down, you can see that we've got red, green, and blue. And we've got percentages for those. So let's just crank up the blue to 1000% and see what happens. Now, you'll notice we've got a little blue hue on it. So basically what this is saying is light will penetrate 4 centimeters into our object. But then we're saying with the blue that it's 1000% of this value here. So if this was down at 100%, it would penetrate 4 centimeters in, determined by the path length. But if I crank this up to 200%, it means that it would go twice this distance. So it would actually be 8 centimeters. And then if we cranked it up again, even further. So this is basically controlling the absorption rates of the red, green, blue. So by cranking this up, we're saying that blue actually travels further, and hence why we've got this blue hue on our model. Same with green as well. Yeah, we should see a difference there. You can see now we've got a green hue there, and obviously you can mix these to whatever you want. So we've got a red and green there, so we should get like an orange hue. Actually quite like that. And you can see now that we've done this, we're actually getting some artifacting on the tail there, or what appears like artifacting. So if I go back to my multiple shader and maybe drop this down to 0.3 and then re-render, it's largely got rid of that. So that's great. Okay. So that's that covered really. Let's go back to our shader. Maybe crank the path length up a little bit more. Maybe not. I think I liked it a little bit lower. And also still getting a little bit of artifact in there. I don't know if it is actually artifacted, but let's see. Yeah, maybe. Right. Okay, so that basically, let's have a look at these controls here. And these are all connected. So if I had a path length of 5 centimeters and I had these at 100%, that would be exactly the same as having these values at 200%, but the path length at half. So say the path length was 2.5, so half of this, but these are all at 200%. It would be equivalent. So you can see how these are interconnected. Okay, so let's flesh out the material a little bit. If we go to reflectance, we can take off this default specular, because specular is basically a cheat. It's a fake. In fact, I'm going to go into the reflectance channel a little bit more in depthly in another tutorial, so we'll go through that there. But for the time being, I'm just going to add a Beckman. Turn our reflectance channel on. We're also going to go down to layer Fresnel, and I'm going to turn the Fresnel on. We choose dielectric. Dielectric is basically something that isn't a metal, really. Your conductors are for something that's a metal, whereas your dielectrics are typically going to be other things like, I don't know, plastics and that kind of thing. So if we go down to, I don't know, let's choose water, that should be fine. So now we've got a reflection on our object with a Fresnel shader. Let's render that. Okay, not a lot's going on because there's not a lot in our scene, so what it's actually reflected isn't really a lot there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a point light actually into this side. And we're going to give it, yeah, we'll give it area shadow, see how that looks. Okay, so now we're actually lighting both sides. I think we can drop our intensity down. Okay, so we're still getting a little bit of that sort of effect. Drop it down even further. Render again. Okay, yeah, so we're still getting a subsurface effect. Right. Let's come out of this camera a minute, and I want to talk about the connect object. Now, if we open our T-Rex model, we can see that we got this, which is subdivision surface. That's fine. And now I've put all my polygon objects in this connect. It's actually off at the moment, but we can see we've got a separate model for the teeth, the body, the left eye, and the right eye. So let's just have a nice little close-up of this gimp's face and render. In fact, what I'll do that in the picture viewer actually, just so we can get a good compare. So we can see something's going on up here. Actually, before I do this, let's open up a material. So we've got this effect going on our luminance channel, and at the moment our dinosaur looks like jelly. I'm going to turn on the color channel, and that's white. Just give that a little render in the viewport. Now you can see you've got a lot more definition in our picture now, and it's because the colour channel basically deals with light that is, it's diffuse reflection, pretty much. Light hits the surface of it. The subsurface scattering shader will deal with light that's absorbed into the object, and the colour channel is really dealing with light that bounces off the surface in a diffuse manner. So you get a little bit of a mixture between both. So let's just go back to that. Obviously our colour channel, we've got white in there, so you can see that it's a lot paler. So let's turn this to something a little bit more drastic. What's our luminance is kind of like a pinky red. Okay, so let's make our colour channel something a bit weird, like a green or something like that, and see what effect that has on. So basically you can see a little bit of green in there, and that is basically dealing with the, like I said a minute ago, the diffuse light coming off the surface of it. Let's try and spin round to the other side, because this light's a lot brighter, so you should see a lot more of that green in there, really. And also, you know, we're at 100%, so let's make this a little bit more like a dark green. See if that has an effect on it. Okay, so it's kind of like a mixture between the two, really. Let's have a look at our luminance. So we could actually bring this down, the actual luminance channel down, and it'll bring the effect of the subsurface in down as well. Oh no, it won't actually, because it'll be this value here, it'll be the mixed strength. So this needs to be nothing, and this is actually our subsurface value. So obviously there it's at 100%, and then down here it's this. So typically what I like to do is take this colour, copy that, and actually have it in my colour of my object. We get some pretty strange results there as well. It's kind of looking a little bit washed out there. Maybe bring our colour value down then. So it's just at, I don't know, 35%, something along those lines. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to the connect object that I was talking about a minute ago. And for now, we turn this colour off. Yeah, okay, so that's actually making no difference. So look at our path length. Might crank the blue up, the red down, the green down as well. Let's try and get a nice little blue hue on this bad boy. Okay, yeah, so you can see that it's got a lovely little blue thing going on. Okay, right, so if we zoom in on the head and have a look at this, you'll notice that the teeth and the eyes, that's kind of why I put the colour on, isn't it? So let's make this, I don't know, like something like this. And crank this up. It's kind of, I don't know if it's because it's sort of counteracting what I'm doing. Okay, so that's better. Let's try that. Okay, so we can see the detail a little bit more now. So you notice the teeth there. Let's render this out in the picture viewer. You notice that the teeth, you know, you may think, oh, you know, they look fine or whatever. And the eye, there's something going on there as well. But the reason I put them in a connect object is because if we turn this on and then re-render, Subsurface Scattering now sees that this object is one whole piece, whereas before it saw it as separate objects. So you can see the difference in sort of like the light transmission between the eye and the teeth and the body. I mean, the body looks exactly the same, but you can just see it looks a little bit more together with that on. So that's something to keep in mind. The connect object is great and it can help in lots of instances, and we'll probably have a closer look at that in another tutorial. But for now, let's go on to the next bit. I think I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in the actual shader. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, cool. Okay. Right, next. The great thing about the subsurface scattering shader is that it works with global illumination. So let's take a look at that. Let's take this light out. We don't need it. And the floor for now. And this other light. We'll leave the camera in for the time. Actually, we don't need that either. We'll take that out. So, let's go into this. This is our render settings. Go to Effect, Global Illumination. We'll leave these settings as they are, because we're not really looking at global illumination. We're looking at the shader. And render, and obviously bugger all happens because we've got nothing to light our scene with. So let's create a material. I'm going to call this sky. Is my caps lock on? Yeah, it is. We can turn off color. We don't need that. And again, we want to use the luminance channel because it's the luminance channel that will be crapping out photons from the image we're going to use. And I'm going to use a HDRI image, so a high dynamic range image. We don't want that, so there we go. There's our image in there, and now we need something to put it on. So if we go to up here and then choose sky, not the physical sky, just the sky object, and then dump this on it. I'm also going to open up my material, go down to editor, and this is the texture preview size. I'm just going to make it big so it looks okay in the viewport. And now we've got a spherical image wrapped around our dinosaur. You can see the light source is coming from up here, so it may be good to actually view our dinosaur from this kind of view maybe, so we can see some of that light transmission. I'm actually just going to grab the T-Rex here and scoot him around a little bit. There we go. So let's have a look at that. You can see that yellow's really coming through now. I'm just going to turn that yellow off for the time being, just so we can have a look at what our jelly dinosaur looks like, and how, and you can see that there's blue coming through there in his mouth, and we would be able to see that blue coming through on his body as well, but our path length is probably too small. So if we crank this up a little bit to say 20, it will look a lot more jelly-like. I was doing that. And you can see a little bit more blue coming through underneath him now on the other side of his face. You can also notice that reflection channel seems to be doing a lot more now because we've actually got something to reflect in our scene, so that'll be the reason for that. Now, let's get our picture viewer back. See, he doesn't look very grounded to the floor there. So let's composite him into the HDRI, as we've looked at in a previous tutorial. I'm going to drop a plane in there. In fact, I could probably use a floor object for this because it's an infinite object. So, yeah, drop our floor in. And if I render now, you'll just see an infinite floor, and it'll be occluding the HDRI, which isn't what we want. So if you go to your floor, right click, go to Cinema 4D tags, go down to compositing. We've got this compositing tag, and down here we've got compositing background for HDRI, HDR maps. So we just click that on, give that another little render, and it should blend that floor into the background now. And Bob's your uncle, it actually looks like he's sort of grounded on the floor. And we can actually make him look like he's a lot more grounded and actually pick out some of the details, say around the mouth and around the eye, and you can see that his right arm here isn't very visible. But if we go to our render settings and go to effects and turn on ambient occlusion, it'll just fill in some of the surfaces that are closer together with a little bit of shadow. Let's have a look at what that looks like. His arm's a little bit more visible in this crease here. There's a little bit more going on. And you can definitely identify his eye a little bit better in his teeth. Okay. Okay, so that's good. So if we, what can we do now? Right, the color channel. This is really sort of like his, like I said earlier, is the light that's going to be sort of bounced off of the surface and not actually transmitted through him. So let's see if we can choose a dark blue or something like that. Sort of. Well, says, I think it's to do with the amount of blue that I've actually got sort of passing through. You'll notice that if we go into this and then roll this down, we've got, oh, don't want to do that. Blue's at 1000% there. So maybe if I put this back down to 100 and crank the green up maybe. So the transmission through him is more green, but the dinosaur's actual colour is more blue. Don't know how this is going to turn out really, but okay. So he's been lit from all round there. What I might do is actually go into my luminance, go into my subsurface. The strength's only at 100%, the path length's 20. That's probably got a lot to do with this. So let's knock this down to 10. Let's knock these down to 100. And the so it is actually red. Crank some blue through him, and then for our color channel something completely different. Yellow or orange was probably a good shout, to be honest. Okay, yeah. So let's give that a go. It's looking a lot more orange now. So we can actually turn the strength of this colour down. Something like 30%, so it's just sort of blending in. So yeah, you can see a bit of blue in there, you can see the pinky red. And you'll notice where the light is actually hitting it directly, like on the edge of this leg here, it looks a lot more yellow. So if we spin round to this side, I should imagine it'll look a lot more yellow. You can see there's a lot more light being collected there. Yeah, so especially on the legs here, it's a lot more yellow. And then on the other side, you can see there's a lot more sort of transition happening. So again, let's just turn the colour off and have a nice look at our little jellied sort of gummy dinosaur. And I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover for the subsurface scattering, as far as I can remember, I think. Yeah. But anyway, I will be doing another tutorial going into probably the Connect object a little bit more deeply, and definitely going to the reflectance channel because that is very important. So thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget you can grab me on Facebook /DigitalMeat3D, and you can find me on Twitter at DigitalMeat3D too. And if you're watching this on Vimeo, the website is digitalmeat.uk. Right, cheers, guy. Bye.